morning. A warm welcome also from my side. I'm Alexander Ritzmann. I'm an advisor to the Radicalization Awareness Network. I've been working on the promotion of democracy and the prevention of violent extremism for about 20 years. The last couple of years also very intensively with the RAN. And it is a privilege now to have excellent speakers in this webinar, researchers and practitioners who will help us to figure out at what point conspiracy myths are becoming a potential security issue, and which good practices or potential good practices are available to either prevent them from becoming a problem or how to counter them effectively. We will have three speakers and myself. I will start by reporting to you the findings of an RAN expert meeting where we actually looked at the topic, gathered some experts, discussed some findings, and then we will go through the program as discussed. The first speaker after the short input that I give will be Francesco Farinelli. He's a researcher in history with a focus on terrorism and radicalization related issues. And he is the program director of the European Foundation for Democracy. Our second speaker then after Francesco will be Katerina Nokun. She's a civil rights activist and a publicist, and most recently co-author of a book titled Fake Facts: How Conspiracy Theories Condition Our Thinking, which was published this year in German. And we have Professor Stefan Lewandowski, a cognitive scientist at the University of Bristol, who has been looking into the whole matter of conspiracy thinking, myth, vaccination opponents, climate change deniers for a long time. And he's the co-author of the Conspiracy Theory Handbook that some of you might have seen, that also the European Commission republished just recently. So before we start with our three speakers, I will now give you a short overview of what the expert meeting that took place a couple of weeks ago discussed and found that is relevant for this meeting here. The role of conspiracy, myth and radicalization processes, key findings. We were looking particularly at what are the individual benefits of believing in conspiracies, so why people actually believe in them, what indicates that a narrative is potentially harmful, and how can resilience towards these potentially dangerous myths be strengthened? How can practitioners be supported to counter conspiracy myth effectively? Now, this is a very interesting quote, I think, that helps a little bit setting the stage. We do not see things as they are, we see them as we are, meaning that our needs, our circumstances determine how we experience the world, also how we look at facts, which is a tricky topic by itself, but it's very important to realize that objective perspectives are a rare thing, and depending on what we need, what our issues are, we look at the same thing from different perspectives, wearing different glasses, so to say. So what are the individual benefits of believing in conspiracy myth? Humans are pattern-seeking animals. We always look for a story that makes sense. We will choose a bad theory over no theory at all. And we will choose a comfortable one over one that is unpleasant. Conspiracy myths are attractive to some people because they are simple and flattering, while the truth or the quest for it is often complicated and painful. If you look at the demographics, a lot of the individuals who are active in the conspiracy myth environment seem to be middle-aged, with a majority of men. There might be an issue with midlife crisis. There's some research that indicates that, but it is really a phenomenon that up to 30% of the population in European countries believe into some sort of conspiracy myth. They offer something that is very interesting to a lot of individuals. They offer that they can blame everything that is wrong with a person's life and also what's wrong with the world at an all-powerful elite. So a personal crisis, for example, after losing a partner or losing a job, feeling excluded or irrelevant, can create the urgent psychological need for a ready-made solution that makes a person feel better. And in that sense, conspiracy myth can serve as a tool of self-empowerment, since they promise clarity, belonging, status, and innocence. Now, what makes now this whole concept and phenomenon relevant for PCVE practitioners? There is no extremist ideology without underlying conspiracy myth. Or put differently, all extremist ideologies are somewhat sophisticated conspiracy myth. Extremist ideologies consist usually of three major elements. First, they claim that their group, for example, the white people or Muslims, are superior to other races or religions. The second is that they claim that their group, their chosen group, and its sacred values are under attack by outsiders. And lastly, they claim that the group is facing an apocalyptic existential threat, like the white genocide, which is also another word for the Great Exchange or the Great Replacement, or the war against Islam. So if you think that your group is being under existential threat, that justifies in that line of thinking or even mandates the support or use of violence. So yet, most conspiracies don't turn into violence in general. So how can we find out what is most relevant? Here you see on the left side a very popular conspiracy theory about the flat Earth. There's tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands, who believe that the Earth is flat. And here this guy who calls himself Mad Mike built a rocket by himself to go up into the sky to check and verify that the Earth is not a globe, but flat. So this was dangerous for him because he died trying to prove that the Earth is flat within an accident when the rocket came down. On the other hand, we have what is part of this QAnon conspiracy, where there's a narrative that there's an elite that is trying to kill or abuse children, rapists, pedophiles, human traffickers, murderers, satanic worshippers. And here you see that there's a tendency to have an apocalyptic dimension, because violating a child's body or killing a child is one of the worst crimes, if not the worst of all crimes. So if you have that narrative, that is an indicator that violence might be necessary and mandated by the followers. So the indicators, therefore, that a conspiracy narrative can be harmful are shown here when they exist in combination, not by itself, in combination. Us versus them. A group thinks that they are better, smarter, that they're the chosen ones, the red-pilled ones, while the rest is stupid or inferior. Them versus us, that this group thinks that they are being victims, that they feel under attack and threatened by others. And again, the apocalyptic dimension, an existential threat to this chosen group, that is imminent, and that outrageous crimes are being committed by others. So there's an urgency to act. So this is what we need to look for, is one of the findings of that expert meeting. If those three things appear together, it is time to take a closer look at the individual that is sharing the narrative and potentially look for help and start an intervention. Now, some other findings of the meeting were, there's also good news, surprisingly to many. According to polls in Germany and Great Britain, the overall trust in science and scientists has massively increased. It has tripled actually in Germany over the last couple of years. Also, disagreements between scientists are accepted as part of the scientific process. But of course, we see and also listen to those who are loud and disagree, those who are confirming or are okay with measures and interpretations of science are not making it to the news usually. That's an overall problem with the whole PCVE situation. Critical thinking, of course, is was promoted. Media literacy, tolerance for ambiguity, dealing with uncertainty, basically, was seen as an essential toolkit in general for capable Democrats, I would say, in open societies, but of course also to increase resilience towards conspiracy myth. Some researchers also suggest, and here we have Stephen Lewandowski, who is actually working on this, on the concept of pre-bunking, meaning that you expose people to the idea to the mechanism of how conspiracy myths work in general, that they aim to manipulate you, which then they say, the research indicates, will lessen the likelihood that people will fall for a conspiracy myth if they encounter one. And we saw that there's a lot of it, as we said before, it's about extremist narratives, conspiracy myths that are promoting violence at some point. There's a lot of similarities. So some of the findings of the Radicalization Awareness Network might already apply here. For example, the RAN Gamma Plus model, which we're going to send to you in an email after this meeting. So this was an introduction of what we've done so far. And I'm now very, very happy that our dear colleague Francesco, who has actually written a RAN paper on the role of conspiracy theories or myth in the mobilization of right-wing extremist violence, which will be published in the next days, that he's going to share the key insights that he found in that paper. Francesco, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alexander. Okay, so we can go directly to the slide number 2, yeah, because today I've been asked to share some of the key findings of the paper I wrote for the RAN and to focus on right-wing extremism. So I would like to start highlighting the main features relating to conspiracy theories, which is possible to identify from the existing literature. Next slide, please. The first one is the speculative feature, because conspiracy theorists start from the assumption that a real and successful conspiracy erases all evidence. Consequently, a conspiracy theory may often focus only on anomalies and fragmentary clues rather than on solid evidence to a core plot. And this assumption enables conspiracy theorists to give validity to their conjectures. They also are contrarian because mainstream and official experts are seen as part of the establishment's attempt to conceal the alleged conspiracy. Therefore, their view is considered fake, and conspiracy theorists are contrarian by nature to their official tale. Conspiracy theories often are esoteric. As you know, official tales of historical events, for instance, often lack the esoteric feel. So, by offering a mixed recipe of mystery and esoteric accounts, conspiracy theories have greater appeal and are more seductive. Next slide, please. They also are amateurish because even though some conspiracy theories have qualifications, most of them are what we can call internet detectives and amateur sleuths. Premodern, in this context, the premodern view considers complex events as always having a deeper meaning and a sort of powerful elite group controlling them. Not casually, the European Commission defines conspiracy theories as the belief that certain events or situations are secretly manipulated behind the scenes by powerful forces with negative intent. And last but not least, the self-sealing feature, which basically means that they can be immune to contrary evidence, and that the attempts to dispel conspiracy theories sometimes may be considered by someone as proof of the validity of these kinds of belief. Next slide, please. Talking about conspiracy theories and violent extremism, we should first of all say that conspiracy theories are popular throughout all kinds of extremism. Consider the fact that they seem to be especially prevalent in relation to terrorist incidents, and that political extremism and conspiracy beliefs both relate to a similar mindset aimed at making sense of society. Extremist groups exploit this human need to spread their radical political ideologies. Next slide, please. As far as the right-wing extremism is concerned, according to Europol, in recent years, right-wing extremists conducted a significant number of terrorist attacks that also reached Europe, inspired by a global community adhering to and reinforcing conspiracy theories and disseminating calls to violence. So, next slide, please. What are their main objectives when spreading conspiracy theories? They first of all provide fuel to recruitment methods, especially creating a sense of immediate danger that requires immediate action, a call for action as stated by Alexander Ritzman. They spread hate speech, contributed to climate of fear and animosity against minority groups. They promote the dehumanization of the target groups. Individuals and groups blamed to be responsible for the evil in society become only a target to be shot down instead of persons. They invert victims and perpetrators, the Jews and the Nazis, for instance. They incite to the use of violence in different forms, not only physical violence, and they increase polarization in society. One clear objective is divide first, and then will be easier to conquer your goals. Next slide, please. Here you can find the main clusters of conspiracy theories spread by right-wing extremist groups, such as the gender one. People who believe in this kind of theory think that gender studies and activism for LGBT rights are by triggering conflict between the sexes. We then have the anti-immigrant one, which includes the great replacement conspiracy theory, narratives like the immigrants are invaders who colonize other people's land at the very basis of this theory, but also the white genocide conspiracy theories, according to which the white race is under attack and threatened by imminent extinction. The so-called Arabia theory, which argues that Western countries are being brought under Islamic rule, and also the anti-feminism conspiracy theories, according to which feminism has been invented to distract women from their natural role as mothers, and consequently blamed for decreasing birth rates in Western countries, something that does not affect immigrants, according to this rhetoric. Another broad cluster is composed by the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, which includes the Holocaust denial, the concept of Zionist-occupied government, which describes the conspiracy belief that the Jewish cabal secretly control major world government. The protocols of the Earth of Zion, Professor Lewandowski will speak more in depth about this later. So I go directly to the anti-establishment and anti-elite cluster now, which include, for instance, the QAnon conspiracy theories, which is not actually only a US phenomenon, because these narratives crossed the Atlantic. We are speaking about something like 500,000 followers in the EU. In France, for instance, the Yellow Jacket movement has embraced the American movement. In Italy, backers hail from the anti-vaccine community, or in Britain, adherents draw from Brexit followers. And then the Pizzagate, famous debunk myth. We can talk more in depth about this later. As a last broad cluster, we also have to include the conspiracy theories related with the COVID-19 context. Right-wing extremist groups capitalized on the pandemic, swamping social networks and the web more in general with racist apocalyptic narratives in a period when people, as you know, were isolated within their homes, making the web their main source of information. Main targets were Jews, Muslims, Asians, and foreigners, especially immigrants. I conclude this very short presentation with some recommendation. Next slide, Maximilian, please. I would like to start from the importance to prevent and to debunk conspiracy theories. Regarding the prevention side, since conspiracy theories can be considered as a symptom of a broad disease in society, targeting some of the drivers, for instance, reducing feelings of uncertainty, mistrust, lack of control, on sensitive communities would be important. Critical thinking, Alexander has already addressed this topic of fact and logic-based interventions have been found to be helpful protective factors in reducing the impact of conspiracy theories, and also the inoculation strategy are helpful, which basically means make people aware that they might be misled before the misinformation is presented. Debunking conspiracy theories is an important kind of intervention when preventive measures fail, and it is important to remember, for instance, that we should distinguish between debunking methods addressed to target highly educated people, or those addressed to target a more general public, or those addressed to people who are chronically committed to conspiracy theories. The interventions must be different depending on the target. Next slide, please. To conclude, the overview also provides specific recommendations for government, civil society actors, research field. I have not the time to list all of them now, so just a few examples. For government, it's difficult to effectively counter conspiracy theories directly, as in the eyes of conspiracy theories, they lack credibility. Therefore, government institutions should invest more resources, I think, in enable credible actors to help people be more resilient to this kind of information. And also government should not underestimate the threat posed by the so-called non-violent groups and their conspiratorial mindset, because they spread divisive messages and hate speech which have an impact in society even when they do not resort into physical violence. For the civil society, I here only quote the importance to assume a proactive attitude in the family environment, because many conspiracy theories are spread and discussed exactly in this context. And as far as research is concerned in this field, it would be really important to merge academic research and activities on the ground to test findings and elaborate more efficient counteraction. Also, and I conclude, it's so important to focus on the broad ideological spectrum of all forms of extremism to mitigate the risk of stigmatizing only some categories. This is crucial in avoiding feelings of victimization. Consider the example of the right-wing extremism, which is now very started investigated, and its opposite side, the left-wing extremism, which is not or very poorly addressed by researchers. So next slide, just to thank you all for your attention. I hope I respect my 8 minutes, and happy to continue the discussion later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you for this. We're going to continue now with our next presentation, as mentioned by Katharina Nokun, who co-authored the book Fake Facts, and who has been very active in recent months, fortunately and unfortunately, I guess, for her on this matter. So please, Katharina, start your presentation.
Thank you for having me. I'm co-author of the book Fake Facts, and we, I and my colleague Pia Lamberti, who is a social psychologist, we did quite some research on the question, why do people believe in conspiracy myths? And the interesting thing is that we started to write the book 2 years ago, and we would have never imagined that it will be published during a time where we have large demonstrations, at least in Germany, of conspiracy believers on the street. And yeah, we need to see that the fact that people believe in these conspiracy theories has a huge impact right now on not only on like long-term political discussions, but as well on the questions how to handle this pandemic. Who is spreading conspiracy myths about coronavirus? Because I think these kind of conspiracy myths are the ones that might be the most, or the ones who get the most attention right now, or are also are spreading very strongly also on social media. I found it very interesting to see that we have a very strong remix culture among different conspiracy myth groups. And this is not a new phenomenon, this has existed before, but my impression is that a lot of debates about the current demonstrations or groups that spread myths about coronavirus like deal with this problem as if this would be something new, as if we are talking about new groups. But our impression was, after this research, that we see a lot of groups that existed long before, which are now joining, like this spreading myth about coronavirus. One example, there is this myth that 5G is used to do kind of mind control, and groups that have spread this myth before are now believing that 5G causes COVID-19, and this is an international phenomenon, and this has also led to attacks on 5G technology in local areas, for example in the UK. We also see a lot of remixes of older myths about vaccination. Of course, not everyone who is against vaccination or who don't want to vaccinate himself or his children believes in conspiracy myths, but there is a large overlapping between these groups, because many influencers who are spreading myths about vaccination argue or use arguments that rely strongly on conspiracy theories, especially conspiracy theories about medical research or pharma industry. And of course, this connects a lot to current coronavirus myths. We also see that, for example, QAnon and New World Order myths have existed long before and now have adopted like the story of coronavirus as part of a larger conspiracy. We also see on many demonstrations and in many groups that myths about the media or politics in general are spread even with the same wording that has been used before in radical right-wing extremist groups. So also this is nothing new, and of course this also shows that existing myths in these groups connect very easily to new myths. We also see, and this has been mentioned before, that the role of esoteric beliefs is largely or has been largely underestimated in the last years, because like esoteric beliefs and conspiracy beliefs share a lot of similar aspects. For example, this belief that there is a truth behind the truth, that there are secret forces we can't even understand, but we just need to believe that there are these forces. And we also see that many esoteric groups are spreading very actively esoteric beliefs. We even have online TV channels founded by esoteric leaders who play a role in spreading myths about coronavirus and also other myths. And there are also research that suggests that people who tend to believe in alternative medicine, like medicine without which is not based on scientific research, like magical tools or whatever, that people who use these kind of alternative measures are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories than the general public. And the problematic thing we see now is that we have many different groups from different like ranges of conspiracy, or many different conspiracy groups and believers who are now unified. And I think this is a phenomenon which is worthwhile being discussed as something very special, because these kind of large demonstrations where very different groups come together, connected through the image or the feeling that there is a common enemy, this is something special. And you also need to see that there is not one myth about the coronavirus. And even when you talk about one group, such as people who believe in 5G conspiracy theories or conspiracy myths, there is not only one myth connected to that. There are always many myths, because the same effect you see in the general, like that different groups use kind of remix strategies to adopt new information or to connect to new events. You see that the same inside groups. For example, when you talk about QAnon, there is not one QAnon story, but many. Yeah, sometimes as many as there are believers, because this is like part also of strategies of conspiracy communities, that they always have something new. Also, they sometimes interpretations of, for example, hints or whatever. We also notice that we are not only talking about ideological beliefs when we talk about conspiracy believers and conspiracy myth groups, but for some it is a business model. Yeah, especially when you talk about esoteric groups, you need to see that that many business models are simply based on the belief in conspiracy myths. So sometimes it is not even clear that people who are spreading conspiracy myths are believing themselves in these myths. I think in most cases this is the case, but sometimes it's really questionable, because not only when it comes to political myths, there is a strong incentive to use these strategies to radicalize groups, to also to for immunization against criticism, but also from a business perspective, there are people who are making a living basically based on the belief in conspiracy theories. Right now you see a screenshot of the online shop of Alex Jones. He has even a Patriot point system where you get a discount when you there, and he's made a living based on this, and has a company which employs quite some people. But why do people believe in conspiracy myths? I think this is an interesting question, especially when you talk about de-radicalization, because only when you understand why people find these narratives so attractive, you can really find a good answer to that. That's at least what we think as authors. And first of all, it's important to understand that believing in conspiracy myths can be a psychological strategy to cope with feelings of loss of control. And right now during the pandemic, we all feel kind of, that we lose control over the life, how it used to be, and many things change, not only from the economic perspective. Many people are frightened that they might lose their job, but also on when it comes to our private life, many things have changed, and some people are simply lonely as well, and very insecure how their future might look like. And believing in a conspiracy myth can create the feeling that you know that there is a plan. This plan is not nice, and that there are these people who are planning this conspiracy, the enemies. That's also not nice, but maybe it's nice to blame someone, and this feeling of there is a plan can can create, at least for the short term, the feeling of security somehow, because you think you know the plan. And also what plays a role is the fact that we all have this intuition that great events must have a great cause as well. This is the reason why so many people believe in conspiracy myths concerning prominent people like Princess Diana or Elvis. But this is also the reason why people believe that coronavirus must be a biological weapon, and it's not the result of a random mutation of a small virus, because it's very hard to accept that such a small events can have such a large outcome, global crisis. And also it's important to see that this belief that one is chosen can give positive psychological feedback to someone. When I think for myself, I'm a critical thinker, and everyone else is manipulated through mainstream media. They are only show. They are not even real human beings, because they refuse to think for themselves. This creates the feeling of being special, and especially for people who don't get this feeling in other contexts in their life, this can be very appealing. And also, we also sometimes see when analyzing why, for example, people join the Reichsbürger movement in Germany, this radical right-wing group. Sometimes we even see the phenomenon that it seems that people are escaping their reality very obviously. For example, when I believe that government is just a construct and the German government doesn't exist, then if I have to pay taxes and back, for example, yeah, and or if I'm in debt, then I don't need to care about this anymore when I believe we are in 2 weeks there is civil war anyway, yeah. So this can be a way to escape, yeah. And last but not least, of course, there are also social aspects to it, yeah, especially during a pandemic where some people are lonely, yeah, and connecting to a group of like-minded people that give you the feeling that you are special and you are accepted just because you believe the same as they believe, can give you a good feeling. So it's important to keep in mind always, yeah, when you talk about measures, the belief in conspiracy myths connects to very basic psychological needs, and sometimes this creates also a vicious circle. For example, take the fact that some people use it as a strategy to somehow get along with this feeling of loss of control. Yeah, it gives you, believing in such a myth gives you in the short term the feeling that you have control, but in the long term it gives you even more the feeling that you are losing control because, of course, you are powerless regarding this large conspiracy. And what's the reaction? You even dig deeper into this conspiracy theory. Also, the same is true or similar is true for social aspects. Yeah, if you, for example, get connected to this group, they give you good feedback. Sometimes this can create also the effect that you disconnect from other people in your life. Yeah, and what's the reaction? You even connect more strongly to the people in the conspiracy group because they are the only ones who don't think you're crazy. And de-radicalization strategies have to keep in mind that there's also a very psychological, very human aspect to it. And we need to talk about de-radicalization because conspiracy myths accelerate radicalization very strongly. We see this with the myth of a great replacement. We see it with QAnon. I think, yeah, we already discussed this in detail about that the apocalyptic scenario creates a certain feeling in groups. Yeah, if we do not act now, it will be too late. There is this existential threat or this threat against, for example, children. Yeah, we need to act now. There's an urgency to it. It's also this us versus them rhetoric and them versus us, this highly ideological black and white view of the world. There are these myths about the strong enemies and yeah, basically it comes down to either us or either you are with us or either you are against us, which also creates a cult, or it can create in some cases a cult-like structure. What's very important, especially in politically ideological groups, is that conspiracy myths gives you kind of an immunization against criticism. Yeah, if you can tell your members do not believe in mainstream media, this is a very, very convenient belief. Yeah, it gives you the absolute control over what your believers should believe. And that's why myths about media, yeah, like Trump's fake news, is not harmless at all. And the last step is, of course, in radical political groups that there can be a legitimization of violence. They tell their members if the game is rigged, it's okay to use violence. It's kind of self-defense. And what troubles me a lot, or what troubles us as authors a lot, are the long-term effects. We see from research that people who believe in conspiracy theories or conspiracy myths are less likely to participate in democratic processes. Of course, when I think that every election is rigged, why should I go to the election anyways? Yeah, people who believe in abstract ideas of a conspiracy are more likely to tolerate violence. And we see that debates escalate more quickly when groups are framed as enemies, based on this, what we discussed already, this dehumanizing aspects of it. And we need to take into account that even if Corona is gone, hopefully sometime in the future, there will be long-term effects regarding trust in media, science, and democratic institutions. And in the worst case, we see a polarization of society. I think it's too early to talk about like this extreme for many European countries, but when we look to the US, I think it's clear that this is a very dangerous path. Thank you.
Thank you, Katharina. That was very informative. I was looking hard for the good news. You must have buried it somewhere deep, and we'll discuss maybe that aspect, what we can actually do with this outline that adds to what the expert meeting found out, what Francesco added. You brought a slightly different perspective to it. Thank you for that. We will continue now directly with Professor Lewandowski. Stephen, please go ahead with your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I want to thank all the preceding speakers for providing amazing context, because they've already said a lot of the things that I was going to start out by saying, which is effectively that there is no violent extremism without a conspiracy theory, and that you can link certain conspiracy theories empirically to violence or endorsement of violence, such as this 5G nonsense in relationship to COVID, which has led to vandalism of mobile phone installations in the United Kingdom. Now, not all conspiracy theories necessarily lead to violence or radicalization, and I'm sure this is nothing new to you here, but I want to express in this graph that we live in a society in which misinformation abounds. We're awash in false information, unfortunately, much of that propagated by certain politicians. Now, misinformation is sort of what you start with. That then percolates into conspiracy theories when it is organized around a common myth or a number of myths. And then you get that as a gateway to radicalization, and then ultimately you end up with a small number of extremists that have become radicalized through this funnel of that starts out with misinformation. Now, my juxtaposition of ISIS and Trump, taken from a cartoon in an American paper, is no coincidence and will become relevant later on. So bear with me for a second until I explain what I think is a remarkable symmetry there between these two groups of people. Now, what can we do about this? Well, there are two things that are two main approaches that I have worked with and that researchers have worked with. One is known as inoculation, the other one is known as debunking. Now, the difference between the two is that inoculation occurs before misinformation is encountered, ideally. That's why this bracket starts right up here at the very top. Whereas debunking can only occur after you've already been susceptible or exposed to the misinformation. Hence, it can only start afterwards. Both of those work to varying extents. Today, what I want to do is focus on inoculation alone, simply because there isn't time to do both approaches justice. So what is inoculation? Well, inoculation in this sense is a cognitive process that is similar to a medical vaccination. And the idea here is that what you do to inoculate people is, first of all, warn them that they can be misled, then explain to them how they're likely to be misled. Now, here's one experiment from a few years ago by a colleague of mine, Karen Douglas, that used inoculation to protect people against the effects of conspiracy theories with respect to vaccination. the issue of vaccination has come up a number of times in the previous talks. There is a large amount of evidence to suggest that anti-vaccination activists or anti-vaccination attitudes are very strongly associated with conspiratorial beliefs. It is, whenever you find an anti-vaxxer, you'll find somebody, if you scratch the surface, who also believes in conspiracy theories. Now, in this particular experiment, there was a control condition in which people were simply asked their intentions to vaccinate on a scale from 1 to 7. The particular number that came out was a 5.5. Now, that number by itself is not terribly important because it is simply an anchor point in a control condition in which people are exposed neither to misinformation nor a correction. Now, if you then expose people in a different group to a conspiracy theory involving the pharmaceutical industry, you can just probably imagine what this would look like. Then their intention to vaccinate is reduced dramatically. And that, of course, is the problem that we want to deal with. Exposure to conspiracy theories has fallouts. Even if people don't become violent just because they hear about 5G and COVID, there is a fallout in that they may be less likely to vaccinate or to believe public health information. Now, the further thing to note is that in this particular study, that if you first present the conspiracy and then try to undo that by having a corrective anti-conspiracy message, well, that didn't work too well because that number over here, the 4.8, is still below the control condition, and the release or relief from the conspiracy narrative on its own is minimal. So this is one of the problems that, having been exposed to a conspiracy, it is sometimes difficult to debunk that or to undo the effects of that. It's not impossible, but it is difficult. Now, if you flip around the order of these two things, if you first tell people that they may be exposed to a conspiracy narrative, and you warn them about how that might be misleading them, and you then follow that by precisely that narrative, then the intentions to vaccinate are not nearly as affected as they are when the conspiracy is there on its own. Basically, what you can do through that inoculation by warning people ahead of time is to undo the negative consequences of exposure to a conspiracy theory. And this is not an isolated incident. There is at least one other study here that obtained similar results by pre-bunking, that is, inoculating people ahead of time against, in this case, a 9/11 conspiracy theory. So informing the public that they might be misinformed and how that misinformation will take place can be a productive way to guard against conspiracy theories. Now, it also works more specifically against radicalizing rhetoric. Let me tell you about an experiment out of my lab done with one of my PhD students that's brand new, where what we did was to create a training video that explains common radicalization narratives. We designed the video based on an analysis of thousands of YouTube videos that were either radical Islamist or extremist Islamophobic, and we extracted the rhetorical techniques that are being used by actual extremists and then try to train people to detect them and to recognize them for what they are. So, emotional manipulation, that is a very clear aspect of radicalization, attempts to radicalize people. We saw some slides earlier about, protecting our children. There's this deep emotional appeal. Polarization is another very clear element of extremist manipulation, trying to, this us versus them narrative, trying to form these two opposing groups, scapegoating of minorities, and so on. There's a whole number of these strategies. We picked those 3 to train people in the experimental condition. Now, that was then followed by target videos. So we have the training first, then we have the target videos. The target videos were created by taking elements of actual YouTube extremist videos and putting together radicalizing messages that were either Islamist or Islamophobic, but they were scripted to be using the same manipulative rhetorical techniques. And so this is where the symmetry here comes to the fore, because we created those videos to be very much the same in how they try to manipulate people into becoming Islamists or into becoming Islamophobic. And here are the data from this experiment. What I'm showing you here are the results for the Islamist radicalizing target video. After the target video, we asked people a whole bunch of questions about the video. Do they agree with it? Did it make them angry? Do they consider it to be reliable? Would they share it on social media? Do they support the content of the video? And what you can see in all cases is that the blue bar, which reflects the control condition in which people saw a video about Bitcoin or something completely unrelated, the control condition differs significantly from the inoculation condition, where we explain to people ahead of time about these misleading techniques. And guess what? That had an effect. People are less likely to share a radicalizing video if they've been inoculated. They're less likely to agree with it if they've been inoculated. They consider it to be less reliable. They support the argument less. So on all these different measures, inoculating people ahead of time to radicalizing information reduces their propensity to fall for that. Now, this is the Islamist video. That's the Islamophobic video. Well, with one exception, you almost can't tell the two apart. That is our training video, which, by the way, did not mention Islam at all. It just talked about generically what misinformation looks like. That video, that training, transferred equally to Islamophobic and Islamist misinformation. So, what's the current state of inoculation? Well, the experiment I just showed you and I talked about, they're part of a stream of studies now coming out that have verified that inoculation can protect people against being susceptible to misinformation, including potentially radicalizing material. And that is what our latest study has just shown, and that is most relevant perhaps to this audience. But it also works against techniques of climate denial, against conspiracy theories about vaccinations, and in various other contexts. The effects are always small, but they're statistically significant. And if you could reduce sharing intention by 10%, while assuming you do that on YouTube, roll it out on a large scale, then you're cutting down potential viral cascades. And just to conclude, just in case you're interested for more on all this, including how to debunk, I was one of the authors of a debunking handbook that came out a few months ago, and the conspiracy handbook, which is now available in lots of different languages, that Alexander already mentioned, is also relevant to what we're talking about.
Thank you, Stephen. Very interesting and very research oriented, which we wanted to add to this webinar. to see some of the real state-of-the-art research, but also going back some of the research that has been ongoing for several years. Thank you for this. We're at the end of the webinar. I thank the panelists for their very enlightening insights. I think we have heard very interesting suggestions and research regarding what is the nature of the problem, and it's not simple, obviously, and we're still learning about it, and we're still researching into it, and some practical ideas on how to prevent or counter it. My final words here would be that we have to handle this with care, because escalation and polarization are in the playbook of the extremists who try to hijack sometimes legitimate grievances and demonstrations. So a part of this phenomenon, I think, will blow over. Once the pandemic is more under control, once the economic situation kind of goes back into a somewhat normal state, people will not be as scared and frightened maybe as they are right now. The extremists will still be there, but if we overreact, if we go too harshly against anyone who is now promoting conspiracy thinking, we might increase the problem that we are trying to fix. And the overarching issue that I have identified is that the lack of trust in institutions, in democratic institutions, seems to be an essential thing for any intervention, even for inoculation. If I don't trust the government who might have funded this program that helps me understand manipulative practices, if I don't trust any of this, I will also not trust that training, right? So the trust in democratic institutions is not there in a small part of the population. Again, we also showed you positive evidence that the trust in science, for example, has been increasing as well. So we have to make sure our picture that we're painting is not too dark, but it asks for smart and effective interventions, and it asks also for caution. Many thanks again from my side.